Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Thom Singer and Craig Brown.
Hey there. You have found your way to another episode of the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Thank you so much for coming along, whether this is your first episode or whether you've been listening for almost 2 years, as we have created this show to be a journey for those who work in and around PLM. The Digital Enterprise Society is a forum for the exchange of ideas surrounding the tools, processes, and practices used across the product lifecycle. To learn more, visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. My name is Thom Singer, and I have the honor to co-host this show every single week with Craig Brown. Craig is an industry veteran and former PLM leader at General Motors. Hey, Craig, how are you today?
I'm good, Thom. We've been having some interesting guests, some of the younger generations, which is great. Today, we're going to find another gentleman like myself who is in retirement. So it'll be an interesting discussion. I'm sure Mark has a lot of interesting insights.
Well, it has been great because of late, we have interviewed a lot of the new board members of the Digital Enterprise Society. And I'm really excited because the Digital Enterprise Society, they're doubling down in 2021 and really going out to provide so much more for all of the members. So in fact, before we get started, I actually want to let everybody know about an opportunity. The Digital Enterprise Society has partnered with the Agile Strategy Lab to bring you this customized 7-week online course, Agile Leadership for Digital Transformation. This course will give you the tools you need to help your team get organized and thrive. Now is the time to invest in yourself, understand and implement the skills of agile leadership to meet the challenges of digital transformation. And space is going to be limited, so you want to register today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. So today's show, we have Mark Pendergast, and he is a brand new board member at DES, as I mentioned. He is also retired these days. However, he had quite an eclectic career where he worked in IT at Aptiv, and he had a couple different roles. He worked as a PLM development specialist. He was an engineering architect dealing with everything around this. And then later on, he was the business liaison to one of the company's key divisions. So Mark, welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here, and I'm excited about the opportunity to talk about some of the work I loved for 40 years.
Awesome. Well, I gave a little bit of your background, but can you tell us a little bit more about your history and your relation to PLM?
Yeah, well, I started my career, like I said, about 42 years ago in General Motors, as a matter of fact, with their Delco Electronics division. I was a manufacturing engineer, and I was a consumer of product information more than an author. And I think that's one of the things in my career that gave me a unique perspective. Was I was always thinking about how can people use this stuff rather than how can I create this stuff and get it stored away somewhere. I moved up through manufacturing engineering, operations, and then one day I ended up managing the acquisition of EDS by General Motors. So I was running their budget because we had outsourced our IT. So about at that point, I started switching more from the engineering roles, the operations roles, into the IT roles. And that was a big change for me. But again, something I was very excited about because coming from the floor, I was, boy, if they ever let me do this, I'm going to do it right. I'm going to show those guys how it's done. So I always sort of had a chip on my shoulder, which made me a pretty effective change agent. But then I moved into a design automation. So I worked with our Unigraphics and Mentor Graphics systems, providing tools to make them easier to use for our users. And then we had a big merger of IT departments for engineering. And the only way the org chart worked out is if I took PLM. I said, okay, I'll try it. And so that was kind of my start into PLM as a author or as a steward of the data. And I inherited a Sherpa-based system, which probably dates me quite a bit, just as it was going out of business. So I led the transformation to move from the mainframe and Sherpa into what was then Metaphase, and it's now Team Center Enterprise. And so that was a huge activity. I mean, global. My working team was basically like 50 or 60 people that we met with all the time. My deployment team was hundreds, and it was very successful. In fact, it's running and growing today. So,
hey, Mark, remind the audience how many sites was that? I recall, but they may not appreciate it that General Motors had engineering sites around the world, manufacturing sites around the world.
Well, just Delco Electronics, we were talking about 100 sites that were using it in some capacity, and it's really just amazing opportunity for me, because at that time I was totally projectized. I really didn't have a lot of people looking over my shoulder. It was do or die. I had a great team, and the luck broke for us a couple of times, and the system is being used today and still being expanded across various divisions. So, and then when I got done with that, they moved me into engineering architecture, saying, hey, come up with frameworks so everybody can be this successful, and did that for a number of years. And then eventually they had one of the divisions, one of our key divisions, was just a very, very tough customer. They chewed up people and spit them out. And they said, well, Mark, they seem to like you. Why don't you go over there and see if you can avoid the fate of others? So I worked with them for probably 5 or 6 years, and it was really very successful. And again, success just came down to being useful, helpful, and listening. So that's pretty much been my role. A lot of innovations that I've introduced, and I say innovations rather than ideas, because I got a lot of stuff into production, which is amazing in a large company.
Yeah. So, Mark, it's good to hear your voice. I think you and I last met. It's been 18 months, right? And because we were at Purdue at one of Nate Hartman's events, and we had met there a couple times these past few years as we both retired. So it's really great to hear your voice. And what annoys me about 18 months is you mentioned to me in passing that you were getting ready to retire. You must feel like you got the double whammy with the pandemic hitting at the same time. I mean, this is like not fair, right?
Yeah.
You retire from work, and then you're told you got to isolate, right?
It has been a difficult journey, because you really can't do it. I've almost become a hermit. I leave the house once a week to go shopping, and otherwise I'm here with the cats. So it's it has not allowed me to reach out. That's why I'm excited about the opportunity with the Digital Enterprise Society. This is kind of my first big venture out, talking to people, doing things. But the COVID has been horrible. In fact, on a sadder note, I lost one of my former colleagues over the Christmas holiday. He passed away from COVID complications. So
basically our age. I mean, in his 60s. Yeah. Oh, that sucks. Well, one of the advantages we retirees have is we get a chance to think back about, what did we accomplish, and what did we wish we maybe did better. And I thought it might be interesting to ask you, what PLM insight most surprised you? So you got involved with the big doc management Sherpa, mainframe to something other than mainframes, workstations, and relational databases. But is that the surprising thing, or even back then, I don't think we called it PLM, right? We called it doc management or something, right?
Yeah.
So what surprised you most?
Being a nerd, being an engineer, the thing that surprised me most is PLM is people.
Oh, that's an interesting piece of insight.
PLM is people.
Are you saying it's people lifecycle management? Because it might be.
No. It's people do it, are it. If you're looking at a computer, if you're looking at something else, you're not looking at PLM. PLM is the people getting their jobs done day in and day out with some assistance from some technology. I think the role of cultural alignment, the role of making people accept it, is way beyond anything I could have imagined as an engineer. Because I'm thinking nuts and bolts, bits and bytes, And my whole career has been talking to people. The other one is the role of storytelling.
Oh, yeah.
And just framing a vision that people can get behind. I wasn't horrible at it, but in the course of that initial deployment of Metaphase, I became a storyteller. You know, the technology was secondary. It was really getting the people to believe, getting them to line up, and giving them a product that was close enough that they said, okay, yeah, we can work with this.
Now, I'll attribute our for everybody's awareness, I used to work at the same facility or complex in central Indiana that Mark was at one point in my career. And I attributed our pragmatism from the Midwest as opposed to those guys from the big city. And then, of course, I ended up at the big city in Detroit. And I got a little bit different perspective. But this point about being able to tell a story and convince people, sell people on the benefits, it's really important. And, a lot of failures and people like to blame technology because it's the third party, but it's really never the technology. Technology now is to the point where you can be successful with a lot of these different packages, whether it's the one that we all used from Siemens or the ones that, other vendors, PTC, Aris, Dassault, and so on. I like your point about it's the people. Now, a lot of management, especially the MBA trained management, not to judge them too harshly, they buy something, they throw it at the engineers and the release agents, and they just expect it to be immediate productivity gain. And so as you were telling stories to the people to convince them, did management need to be convinced as well? Or did you have to engage management in a certain way?
Management tended to be a problem because, as you said, they just assumed that the salesmen were correct, and not to throw too much shade on the salesman.
Oh, come on. Does any never mind. Does any salesman correct? Come on, guys. I'm thinking used car salesman.
Well, I think there's a joke that goes along the lines. The punchline is their lips are moving, right?
Okay.
Hey, I spent my whole career in sales. Watch yourself there, Craig.
Yeah. But
well, Thom, your position in the podcast, the beginning, the end, and stay out of the way in the middle. Okay.
Yeah. Well, one of the stories I had to tell is, and this came to me as kind of a shock, is most of my leadership grew up on drafting boards and had never used any of this technology and really couldn't understand why you would even need this stuff.
Yeah.
And their secretaries answered their emails. I mean, they were almost technophobes.
Yeah.
And I had to tell a story almost in paper terms to get them to understand what we were doing with the technology.
Yeah. One of the things, and I think they had a point, or at least some of them did. There's a professor, he's back at Purdue now, that he said, the advantage of drafting boards is that people looked over your shoulder all the time. Mm-hmm. And so there was a natural collaboration going on in design. And the trouble with computer-based, especially PC-based tools, is people go to their cubicle and they just deal with their computer all day. And so this oversight, started to falter. And then it got worse because then we said, we're going to manage files, right? We're going to check files in and check files out. And don't check your file in until you're ready to share it, but you're never ready to share it because you're still interfacing with the guy next to you. So there's an interesting problem that occurred with distributed computing and the way files are managed. And I think some of those management said, I never had that problem on a drafting board, right? A, I had somebody looking over my shoulder, and B, I had to put it back in the filing cabinet every night so that in case somebody else took over tomorrow, it was there. And your kind of parts, they're digital parts, but there were some sensors and actuators as well that Delco made. And you had one device back in the early days where you're interfacing with a human, right? The radio systems and all that. So, well,
one of the activities I used to do to prevent some of those problems, I used to call it the baby in the bathwater exercise.
Okay.
And we'd write down and we'd say, okay, what's horrible about the old system that we want to get rid of? But we'd also ask, well, what's really great about the old system that we want to keep?
Mm-hmm.
And that kept our mind on things that we would lose if we just blindly moved to the new technology. And I think that's kind of what you've been talking about is we throw out things that are good moving to a new technology, and we are poorer for it.
Yeah, so I really like your point about the people and PLM and adoption and how you go about it. I have a couple different thoughts that I shared with you, but one I want you to teach the audience a bit about pervasive computing. So you guys embraced metaphase, you made it work really well. When we brought back a piece of Delco back into General Motors, one of the challenges we had was extracting that metaphase-based system and replacing it with the current Team Center unified system. Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, it was difficult. And part of the reason it was difficult is because you guys, rightly so, had made it work really well for that part of the company that needed that. Mm-hmm. So what I'm curious for you to expand on is, now that we've got more and more computers and this machine learning's picking up speed and all these other things, does that help this transformation of technology or people embracing the new technology because we got so many cheap computers everywhere?
No, I don't think it really makes it easier. And in some ways it makes it harder. I think what I've found is as an IT professional, nobody thinks conceptually about how the IT system works except the IT guys. And most of them don't do it very well. So the more moving pieces there are, the less people understand it because they're focused in on their little piece of the pie and they don't really understand how things come to them and they don't really understand how things go away from them. And I think, again, that's something I told a lot of stories about. Why are you doing this? Oh, well, because this guy 3 steps down is receiving a tremendous benefit from that, and we're making more money. Mm-hmm. So I think computing's become much, much more affordable than it was before. I mean, when it was on the mainframe or even some of the workstations, it was a big investment, and now it's not. But I think the big thing is it's allowing us to increase the scope of PLM to where it should be.
Right.
So in the past, you and I, when we were doing this for a living, worried about that golden model. What was the archetype? And I think as we move to the digital enterprise, we're not worried about the model anymore. We're worried about every single instance and its particular variation and how it's being used. And we're getting much deeper into it because we now have the compute to understand that much data.
Yeah, and you even get the usages you didn't intend, right? People use your products in ways not intended, and all of a sudden you got a warranty problem on your hands. Right?
Exactly. And I think that's the new frontier that compute brings to us, is we can actually manage that data that we just waved our hands at and said, well, marketing will tell us what's going on. And I think digital brings new opportunities, but it brings some threats and risks as well, because small innovators can now take over a market very quickly by having better information than your big monolithic, company.
Now, some of the notes you sent me, and I really agree with this, but I want the audience to hear this point too about the information flow, right? You gave an example of somebody a few steps downstream benefited from this step that somebody else was taking. Do you think people understand the flow of data or the flow of decisions, and what do you tell them when they don't, or when the data quality is suffering? How do you get them to realize that if you fix the flow, you actually are going to improve the company a lot?
Well, there's a lot of techniques, and it's hard to do. And most people grew up in their one functional job and have never done anything else. I was blessed that I had done so many different things that when it came time to deploy, I knew everybody's job and I knew where all the skeletons were buried. So I became that change agent that could explain to the engineering guy why the ops guy was mad at him, and explain why the ops guy why changes took so long. And I was able to do that personally. A lot of people don't have that background and find that hard to do. But I think, again, that's why I say PLM is people. It is the people understanding what they're doing with the product data. And the tools can help and processes can help, but if those people don't know what they're doing or why they're doing it, it just can't possibly work, no matter how good your tools are, no matter how good your processes are, because they don't have a feel for it. And
Yeah,
so that's the challenge. And again, it is culture, it's storytelling. Remember back in the day, we used to rotate engineers between various assignments so they kind of
Yeah.
know.
Well, everybody
Right,
knows.
Where did that go?
Everybody knows what IBM stands for. It stands for I've been moved, right? and a lot of people, it's interesting you point that out because that's actually happened a lot less. And maybe that's advice you and I could give to our listeners is accept different job assignments. Make sure you take on different jobs. I know I benefited, right? I came out to where you are when it was all about electronics and embedded software, right? And I ended up as the PLM leader, which is a different thing. And I'm an engineer by training, right? So I'm before there were computer scientists, there was a bunch of us doing computer science work, right? So interesting.
Well, it's also the IT people. Do you realize one of the best things I ever did when we were deploying Metaphase? I brought my EDS developers examples of the products we made because they were seeing them as data and they were meaningless to them, along the lines of what we're saying. And I actually brought them some engine control units and we tore them down and I showed them what a circuit board was. And, these are the things that are on the BOM. And it really made a difference because it was then real to them. And so even if you don't take another job, I remember we used to have field trips where we'd take the young engineers down to the floor and they'd sit there and watch the operators do this stuff. And they would be amazed that it was such chaos down there.
Now, are you saying they've stopped all that, or as you were ending your career, it wasn't done anymore?
Yeah, it was not done very much at all from my perspective. In fact, you almost separated out product development people from floor support people, and there was almost a brick wall between them. And it was unfortunate.
So there's two old guys. We're both retired. We're telling the audience, even if that's the way your company works, take on an assignment to go to the manufacturing floor or to go to the help desk and just learn how your systems are used and what your company is producing, right? Because I agree with you. Going to the manufacturing floor and watching things, as I moved to General Motors proper and away from one of the component divisions, I did a lot of plant audits at a lot of different places. And it was interesting to see the products made. And especially those of us that built embedded software, well, you hardly ever see software. You see the behavior of the software, right? You don't actually see the software. So it's cool to see the computer it goes in and that computer gets installed in the car and all the rest of that. So there's another topic, and actually we have an advertisement for one of our sponsored courses about Agile. And Agile is a very popular thing, and I think it's pragmatic. In fact, I think car companies have done Agile for decades. We just didn't call it that, right? Where we fine tune something year after year. But I wanted your insights on architecture. I mean, we need a plan. You don't build a cathedral through incremental development. You need an architect or something, right? Don't you?
Yeah. Well, you're preaching to the choir on this one. In fact, for one of my other societies I belong to, I was going to make the presentation. I hate Agile, and so should you.
Oh, cool. Maybe you should give it here. When you have it ready, I want to talk to you about it.
Yeah. Well, I think the problem is Agile, the process, is a good thing. Agile, the religion, is not.
Okay.
And I came up with this because I was attending a presentation on Agile, and one of the audience members raised their hand and said, my company refuses to do real Agile. They expect us to keep budgets and timelines. And I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. And, but really Agile evolved to better meet budgets and timelines.
That's true. Yeah.
Not to throw them out the window. And if you read the Agile Manifesto, it's a change in emphasis, not a change in what you do.
So is there an architecture then? I get that the Agile has benefits, but there's also
Agile has a planning phase.
Right.
It works in a context. The Agile that most people talk about is that little execution piece once you've got a plan to actually get from A to B. But before you start that, you have the initiating. Are we even going to do this? You have architecture, you have all these things. And in fact, the planning has to be more rigorous because you're not exactly sure where you're going to end up. And I think with Agile, the big shift that people are having trouble with is the fact that we're shifting from feature outcomes to business outcomes. And that's where the Agile open, it could be anything, misses the boat, because they're saying, oh, well, the features could be anything. And they're completely ignoring business outcomes, which we do in waterfall as well. But if you say the business outcome, I've got to deliver change management and document management, BOM management out, and it has to work, and I want to reduce this much cost in my change cycle or whatever. Well, then if you can start making these agile tweaks to say, oh, well, when we talked to the users, we thought this feature would be good, but they really don't want it. They want this one instead. That's where Agile has that flexibility to not show up 3 years later and realize they could care less about half the features you've got.
Yeah. Which waterfall?
You show up 2 weeks later and they go, what were you thinking?
Right.
Were you even listening to us?
And your example is the key point about why Agile is more powerful, is that you keep checking in with the stakeholder, with the person that asked for it, and make sure it's what you want. Let me spend a couple more minutes on another topic we exchanged, which was this point about customization versus adaptation. So I was quite impressed with what you guys did with Metaphase. But then, of course, the supplier and Unigraphics/Siemens moved on. Teamcenter Unified came around. And I think there's this point about staying current with the commercial marketplace, if for no other reason than to get stuck in a corner, right? On the other hand, if that commercial product went away from some of the adaptations you're used to, and now you've got to write customized code, that'll potentially slow you down even further, right? So do you have some advice for people on how to think about adaptation versus customization? I mean, do you outlaw either one of them, or what?
No, actually, that's another presentation I'm going to make someday.
Okay, that's 2 assignments you have. Your retirement should be fine, okay?
Yeah.
I'm just pointing that out.
People think of customization as some mystical thing or some horrible demonic thing, and it's not. What it is, at the end of the day, is an investment. And the model that I've come up with in my own head that makes it all make sense to me is customization is tooling.
Yeah. Well, you're a manufacturing engineer, so of course this makes sense.
So I buy a plastic molding machine, and what does it do? It injects plastic onto the floor in a puddle. I have to buy tooling to customize it to make my part. I have to build that tooling. I have to have a spare tool. I got to build a tooling center to keep it up to date and fix it when it breaks and all that stuff. And I have a life cycle investment to keep that tool running forever. Why can we do that? But when we look at a PLM system and say, hey, it's throwing changes on the floor and we're making errors, we can't say, well, I got to buy a customization. I'm going to have a customization fix-it shop. I'm going to be paying for that customization for the rest of my life and make an intelligent decision.
Yeah, my 2 cents to add on to that is just, I think some of these same MBA folks that bought a tool, put it on the shelf and said, hey, we're done. That's the problem is their mental model is wrong. We're never done. And the investment to keep a factory running is similar to customization. And there are commercial products that are pretty easy to adapt to do all kinds of injection molding, but that's what you have to figure out along the way is do you have tools that are close to the way your business practices work, or are you so far behind in business practices that you need to change anyways in order to catch up, right?
Right. So you'll find I'm a big proponent of customization. In fact, my IT buddies told me I completely over customized Metaphase, yet it was funny. If you want a different perspective, you get outside of IT. I was in a presentation where we're rolling this out and I'm telling them, what we're doing. And I had a certified black belt lean master come up to me and say, you haven't customized enough. This should work exactly the way the people work. So, from a lean perspective, if you've got an assembly line and parts are falling on the floor, or you're missing screws or whatever, what do? You error proof. Well, if the same thing happens in an information system, you error proof. Well, what is that error proofing? Well, unless the vendor's really swift, it's customization. Now, as an architect, I can tell you there are lightweight customizations that do a really nice job, and there are horrible customizations that
because they are hard to maintain and they cost a lot.
They're hard to maintain. In fact, not to name names, but a certain certain supplier of PLM systems would come in, and their consultants would do the worst gut-wrenching customizations that you would ever imagine, using secret APIs that nobody ever heard of that were impossible to maintain. And then they'd yell at us for over-customizing.
There's going to be a handful of people listening that are going to really love the fact that you said that. We know who we're talking about. We'll leave it at that. Well, anyways, Mark, it's great chatting with you, and I think you're doing fine in retirement despite the pandemic. And I do encourage you to do just what you said. You're going to get involved with a few things. That's why I'm doing podcasts, to be honest. I think there's things we have to share with that younger generation. Some of them really get it. Some of them get that there are insights we have that we can be great mentors. They look forward to working with you. So you'll be surprised as you work in the board, that just the chemistry between the generations. And I'm really happy you took on that challenge to be a board member. So with that, I'll pass it back to Thom.
Yeah, no, Mark, this was a great conversation. Thank you for joining us here. And there was something that you and Craig talked about that really stood out to me. And that was, you said how back in the day, the young engineers used to go on field trips to the floor and really see how the things they were designing were being put to use. And I think that that's great career advice. And I always like to end this show with a little boost for our listeners on some ideas. So in addition to that piece of advice, what other advice would you give somebody who had an up-and-coming career to make sure that they have the types of different opportunities that you were able to have to be able to grow and change throughout?
Well, I think the best advice I can give to anyone coming up is build your network. In my later career, I was able to do amazing things. Like I said, an innovator has to get things done, and you get things done through your network. I had an amazing network. In fact, I in my later career, I had directors that would just look at me and say, "Mark, how did you get that done? This was impossible. Nobody could do this." And I called in favors. And so I guess I would go along with it. How you build your network, you do favors for people. You have people owe you favors. I never turned anyone down. No matter how far it was from my core job function, if somebody needed help, even if it was something stupid like, well, I need a little Excel macro to do something or whatever, I would always try and help them, because 2 years later, I'd be back saying, we're trying to deploy this module and I'm getting resistance from Harry over here. Could you talk to him? Could you help me push this through? And they go, "Oh yeah, Mark, I owe you. Hey, we can do this." Build your network, leverage it to get things done. Getting things done is what matters. Technology has no value if you can't deploy it and get people to embrace it. So PLM is people. Go find some people, get them on your side, make them love you. For probably the last 12 years of my career, every time I went up to headquarters, I'd leave a Hershey dark chocolate kiss on every desk in IT. In fact, to this day, there's people that don't know it was me doing it, because I'd sneak in after hours. But I'd come up to those people and say, "Hey, I need some help on this." And they'd look at me like, "Oh, gee, I'm so busy." And I go, "Hey, I'm the chocolate man." And they go, "Okay, fine. What do you need?" But again, you find little things. I know earlier in my career, I used to keep a notebook. What soda did people drink? What did they like in their coffee? Who were their kids?
So you're just giving us good relationship management, which is, by the way you get things done. So
yeah, and anybody who knows me knows that's what I have taught. I've gone into companies and taught people, like in this gadget crazy world, how do we get back to human connection, human engagement? So to me, you're speaking to the choir, but I think that is, we can't have that advice often enough for people who are trying to build their careers. Because I tell everybody, all opportunities in life come from people, and everything is in a pattern of circles. What you do at one end comes all the way back around in that pattern.
You reap what you sow.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being so dedicated to people and for your new dedication to the Digital Enterprise Society. And thank you for being here on the show. Greg and I really appreciate it because every week we try to bring great thoughts, great ideas, and great information in and around product lifecycle management. And today you helped us do that. Remember, everybody, the Digital Enterprise Society, it is the place for the exchange of ideas around digital manufacturing tools. Go check us out right now at digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next week for more connection without boundaries and creation without limits.